The first thing they noticed was not the planet. It was the ring. From the distance of their initial drop out of FTL, the explorers expected the usual signatures: belts of dust, frozen debris, faint signals of radiation. But what their scopes showed them was wrong. The orbit of the third planet in the system was littered not with stone, not with ice, but with shapes that registered organic. Countless fragments. At first, they thought it was interference. Radiation sometimes mimicked organic material on long-range scans. But then the ship's forward cameras resolved the detail. Bones. Skulls drifted through the thin orbital haze like pale lanterns. Rib cages arched in long, broken chains, some bent into arcs that curl around the planet like shattered halos. Arm bones, leg bones, and stranger forms, spines that twisted in unnatural curves, jaws lined with too many teeth, limbs that forked into branching skeletal trees. Turned slowly as if the void itself were displaying them. The crew went silent. This was not an asteroid belt. It was not a planetary ring. It was a grave. The exploration vessel Canner's Promise carried a crew of 23. They were scientists, navigators, and surveyors, not soldiers. Their mission was to chart a forgotten sector, one of the thousands left untouched after the last expansion wave. The assumption had been that the systems here were quiet, unclaimed, and lifeless. No one expected this. "Confirmed signatures," said Captain Dyer, his voice low, unwilling to break the silence. The sensor officer swallowed hard. His eyes twitched as the readings updated, flickering between mineral traces and hard organics. "It's calcium, sir. Calcium phosphate. Density and composition are consistent with skeletal remains." "Remains of what?" asked one of the surveyors. Her voice shook. The officer didn't answer. The forward glass showed them more detail as they drifted closer. The bones were not random debris. Some pieces had once belonged to creatures the size of cities. Others were delicate, brittle, almost insect-like. One skull, larger than their entire ship, rotated slowly, empty sockets catching the dim red light of the system's dying sun. The planet below was worse. They expected rock, maybe some broken terrain. Instead, its entire surface seemed pale and uneven like frost. But as the ship drew into orbit, the white layer resolved itself into jagged fragments. Shattered skeletons stretched across craters and valleys, layered so thick that the surface looked like a sea of bone dust. Skulls by the millions. Rib cages piled on rib cages, crushed under the weight of eons. It looked as though the planet had been clothed in death. A navigator muttered a prayer under his breath. Another crew member made a dry, choking sound and left the bridge in silence. But the horror was not limited to bones. Farther out, beyond the ring, the scanners caught massive metallic hulks drifting in slow, eternal silence. Starships, alien warships. Broken hulls twisted around planetary orbit, gouged and torn, their shapes half familiar and half alien. Some looked insectoid, built from curving organic designs. Others were brutal wedges of black metal scarred by fire. There were thousands. Some still carried passengers, or what was left of them. When the cameras zoomed in, the crew saw bodies frozen in the void, strapped into dead cockpits, hanging limp from ruptured airlocks. Their skeletons were locked in poses of terror or rage, mouths agape as if their final screams had outlasted their flesh. Many were cracked, shattered, or fused to their own ships, as if the same fate that stripped the planet had claimed them too. One of the junior officers gagged and vomited against the wall. Nobody scolded him. The smell of bile filled the bridge, sharp and acidic, mixing with the tension in the recycled air. Captain Dyer remained still, his eyes fixed on the forward glass. "Record everything," he said at last. "No contact, no landing, just record." But curiosity bled through fear. The crew whispered to one another in the quiet between orders. Some thought it was a graveyard of war, that 2 or more civilizations had annihilated each other here, leaving nothing but calcium ruins. Others thought it was ritual, something ancient and incomprehensible, a battlefield turned into a monument. The unsettling truth pressed on all of them. The bones were not from one kind of being. They were from hundreds. Human eyes traced the alien shapes with unease. A long rib cage bent in too many directions. A skull with 4 jaws and 3 empty sockets. a spine thicker than a skyscraper, bent into a broken loop. These were not just soldiers. These were ecosystems. The canner's promise drifted in silence for hours, cameras and scanners working, recording. The ship moved past one wreck after another. Some of the alien ships still bore the marks of weapons fire, burnt scars, impact holes, fractured engines. Others were sheared apart as if torn by immense force. And some, disturbingly, appeared intact, their crews simply dead within. The further they looked, the more impossible it became to rationalize. No single war, no matter how vast, could have spanned this many species. The skeletal diversity was staggering. Some bones resembled mammals, some reptiles, some insects, and some belonged to forms that had no analog on Earth. Many were too large, too small, or too strange to classify. This was not a single battlefield. This was an ossuary of civilizations. Captain Dyer said little as the data accumulated. His face remained stone, but his knuckles whitened where he gripped the railing. He was a man who had seen wars, but never this. At the end of their first circuit, when the ship turned once more toward the pale surface below, the crew collectively exhaled. The planet's horizon stretched endless and white, bone layered on bone, dust filling the valleys, spires of vertebrae jutting like broken towers. It looked eternal, endless, a world carved from the corpses of the forgotten. No one wanted to speak aloud, but the thought hung over every mind. This place should not exist. Still, their orders were clear. They were explorers. They were here to chart, to catalog, to log what was found. Even if what was found was horror itself. Captain Dyer finally gave a command. Prep survey drones. Full orbit. We need complete mapping of the system. No assumptions, no gaps. His crew obeyed in silence. But no one wanted to look too closely at the screens. The planet turned beneath them, pale and monstrous, and for the first time in their mission, the explorers of Canner's promise wished they had never come this way at all. The drones were the first to enter the grave. Each small craft detached from the belly of Canner's promise, thrusters igniting with faint blue sparks as they drifted into the white haze of orbit. Their cameras streamed back endless images. Tumbling bones, derelict ships, fragments of shattered weapons drifting, as if they had been abandoned yesterday, though scans confirmed they were centuries, perhaps millennia, old. The crew gathered in silence around the displays. Every passing frame deepened the unease. One drone skimmed close to a broken hull the size of a city block. Its surface was scorched, melted in places, but still carried markings, symbols carved into alloy, faded paint in a language no one recognized. Inside its ruptured body floated skeletal remains, all of them strapped into chairs. They were humanoid, but only vaguely. Too many fingers, spines curving backward into spiked ridges, skulls with wide, empty sockets. The corpses hung in zero gravity like puppets with their strings cut. Another drone swept over a cluster of massive ribs, bones large in the ship itself. They stretched out in a spiral, each curve longer than a skyscraper. For a moment, the crew thought they were seeing the remains of some titanic beast. But as the drone widened its view, they realized these ribs wrapped around an entire derelict vessel. It was as if the creature had grown over the ship, or the ship had been built inside it. Whether the bones belonged to the ship's defenders or something else entirely, none of the explorers could say. The quiet of the bridge was broken only by the sound of shallow breathing. "This isn't a battlefield," one of the technicians whispered. "It's a slaughterhouse." Nobody corrected him. The drone spread farther, mapping wreckage fields that stretched for thousands of kilometers. They recorded ships of dozens of different designs, dagger-shaped frigates, bulbous carriers, crescent-winged destroyers. Some bore scars of combat. Holes burned clean through their hulls, jag rents from impact weapons. Others were simply broken apart, as if gravity itself had pulled them to pieces. And the bones were everywhere. Not only inside ships or scattered across the planet's orbit. They floated in clouds between wrecks, tangled in the twisted metal like fishing nets of death. Human eyes traced them and found no comfort. The variety was staggering. Some skeletons were small, frail, no larger than a bird. Others were massive, spines thicker than human buildings, teeth like obsidian knives. Many were alien beyond comprehension. Forms that bent anatomy into shapes the mind struggled to process. Triple-jointed limbs, skulls with layered mandibles, vertebrae that spiraled in helixes instead of lines. And some weren't skeletons at all, but chitinous shells, like the discarded armor of insects magnified to impossible scale. Every scan confirmed it. Hundreds of distinct species. The crew argued in hushed tones, fear sharpening every word. "It must have been war," said Cora, the surveyor. Her hands trembled against the console. A war that spread across systems, civilizations devouring each other until nothing was left. "No war spans this many," replied Shale, the sensor officer. His face was pale, eyes fixed on the data. This is too many. Too different. And look at the timelines. Some of these remains are millions of years old. Some are only centuries. This isn't one war. It's continuous. That word lingered in the air like a disease. The drone sent back more images. One floated through the interior of a half-destroyed carrier. Its walls were scorched, its deck split, but its halls were still lined with corpses. Rows upon rows of skeletal soldiers, armor still clinging to their bones, weapons frozen in their grips. They had died in formation, ranks of the dead marching nowhere. Another drone caught a different horror. A derelict city ship, its entire population visible through broken glass domes. Civilians, not soldiers. Families, children, elders, reduced to drifting skeletons. One image showed a smaller form clutching another. The bones fused together as if even death hadn't separated them. The youngest crew member on Canner's Promise, a communications cadet named Alan, turned away from the screens and retched into his hands. His vomit spattered across the floor, the acidic stench cutting through the recycled air. No one mocked him. 2 others followed, gagging into their sleeves. It was too much. The sheer scale of death pressed on him like a physical weight. Captain Dyer remained upright, though his knuckles had gone white against the railing again. His jaw flexed, but he said nothing. The drones continued their grim harvest. More ships, more bones, more proof. Entire armadas had died here. Entire civilizations had perished. And yet, there was no sign of what had caused it. No central weapon. No planetary crater. No singular source of destruction. The wreckage bore the marks of violence. But violence without explanation, without victor. It looked less like a battle, and more like a ritual execution played out across light years. When the drones circled back toward the planet, their cameras captured the surface in sharper detail. What the crew had mistaken for smooth plains were actually seas of bone dust, shifting dunes made of crushed remains, mountain ranges of stacked vertebrae cut across continents. Valleys were filled with skulls, piled so deep that their hollow sockets looked like black lakes from orbit. Cora covered her mouth with her hand, whispering through trembling fingers. This isn't just one planet. This isn't just one battle. This is a graveyard for galaxies. Her words weren't far from the truth. On the far edge of the system, another drone picked up faint signatures. More calcium, more debris. It wasn't limited to the third planet. The entire system was littered with it. And beyond, faint traces suggested neighboring stars might carry the same disease. The data scrolled across the captain's display, bone signatures stretching farther than their mission could survey. Dyer finally spoke, his voice low, hoarse. "Log it all. Every fragment. Every ship. Every bone. And then we leave." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. No one argued. The drones finished their passes, their cameras capturing a final set of images. A skull larger than a human city, fractured down the middle, a tangle of alien warships impaled on spiral ribs, a frozen fleet drifting together as if still awaiting orders that would never come. When the drones returned, their storage banks filled to the brink with horror, the crew of Canner's Promise avoided looking at the feeds. They didn't need to. The images were already burned into their minds. And though none of them dared say it aloud, each wondered the same thing. If this was what had been left behind, what had done the leaving? Landing was not the captain's choice. Dyer had ordered only survey passes, only remote scans, nothing more. But the drones, for all their reach, could not catalog the surface with enough fidelity to satisfy their mission parameters. Their orders from Central Exploration Command were clear. Any unexplored sector had to be mapped, logged, and certified, surface readings included. And if they returned without doing so, questions would be asked. So, reluctantly and against the will of most of the crew, Canner's promise lowered a lander to the haze of orbit and toward the bone-white world. The descent was silent. The pilot, Ennis, kept her eyes fixed forward as the lander shook with turbulence. Below them stretched an endless sea of pale fragments, glittering faintly in the red light of the dying sun. There was no water, no vegetation, no stone, only bones, stretching from horizon to horizon. Dust clouds of powdered calcium swirled, as far as the eye could see. As the lander dropped lower, the details sharpened. The dust was not fine sand, but shattered fragments of skeletal remains, ground down by time, by collisions, by weight. Whole ridges of cracked vertebrae jutted from the plains like ruined walls. Craters were filled not with rock, but with skulls, packed tightly together until their hollow sockets looked like pits of shadow. No one spoke. The lander touched down with a crunch that reverberated through the hull. The landing strut sank into a surface that was not solid soil, but a brittle layer of broken bones. The sound was unbearable, a brittle, grinding crack that made every crew member flinch. When the hatch opened, the smell surprised them. Not the rotted decay. The corpses were far too ancient, but a dry, chalky stench, like ground teeth or burned lime. The air was thin but breathable, though it carried a sharp metallic tang that clung to the tongue. They stepped out onto the surface. The first step felt like blasphemy. Boots sank into powder and fragments, crunching loudly with every movement. Every footfall was the shattering of something once alive. Ennis gagged, turning away, her face pale. Shale, the sensor officer, muttered to himself in short, broken phrases, as if cataloging samples would distract him from the truth. The horizon was jagged with skeletal towers. They weren't buildings. They weren't even ruins. They were ribs, arches of bone longer than bridges, jutting from the surface at sharp angles. Some curved inward as if embracing nothing. Others rose like broken cathedral spires. Between them lay fields of femurs, spines, jaws, all arranged without order, stacked upon each other until the land itself seemed to writhe. This planet was never its own, Cora whispered, her voice trembling through the comms. It was layered, piled up. This isn't soil. This has remained stacked so deep it became the ground. Her words were not exaggeration. Their scanners confirmed it. The bone strata extended for kilometers below the surface. This was not the skeleton of one world, but countless. They moved cautiously, their suits recording every step. The lander stayed visible behind them, a fragile tether of safety against the horizon's madness. Not far from the landing site lay a ruin that was not made of flesh. A wrecked war machine, half buried in the bone dust, its hull cracked open like a carcass. It had once been immense, large in the lander itself, maybe even rivaling Canner's promise, but now it was just jagged plating and exposed frames. Inside the torn belly of the vessel lay corpses, their skeletons still strapped into seats. Their bones had fused with the metal in places, as if time had welded them into their own machines. Ennis climbed closer, peering into the shadows of the cracked bridge. She froze. The bodies inside were not soldiers. Their bones were smaller, frilier. Some were children. She turned away and vomited into her helmet bag, sobbing wordlessly. The comms filled with her ragged breathing. The others said nothing. They pushed farther. Past the wreck lay a field of war relics. Rusted blades the length of towers, shattered tanks with skeletal remains still frozen at their controls, weapons fused with arms that had long since turned to brittle white. The ground was littered with cracked helmets of species none of them could name, and shattered banners still clung to broken poles, their colors bleached into nothing. It was a battlefield, but a battlefield without time. No scavengers had come. No vegetation had claimed it. No erosion had buried it. Only bones sealed in their eternity of silence. And then they saw the monument. At first, it looked like a mountain rising above the horizon, taller than anything else around it. As they drew closer, the truth revealed itself. It was not stone. It was not natural. It was a tower of skulls. Hundreds of thousands of them, stacked together with eerie precision. fused into a spire that rose nearly a kilometer into the air. Different shapes, different sizes, different species, but all arranged so that their hollow sockets stared outward in every direction. Some of the explorers froze in place, their knees weakening. One of the junior scientists fell to ground and curled into himself, whispering that he couldn't look anymore. Shale, pale and shaking, pointed toward the base of the tower. His scanner showed faint radiation signatures, pulsing through the skulls, as though something had once drained them, leaving their remains not only as monuments but as conduits. Captain Dyer ordered them back to the lander immediately. His voice was clipped, sharp, but beneath it was something rare for him. Fear. The walk back was worse. Every step seemed louder. The crunch of bones beneath boots echoed too long, as if the planet itself were listening. Cora kept glancing over her shoulder, certain the skull tower's sockets were following them. Ennis stumbled and nearly collapsed, still crying quietly. When they reached the lander and sealed the hatch, the silence inside was overwhelming. No one spoke. They lifted off without discussion, the struts tearing free from the brittle surface with another shattering crack. The lander rose into the pale sky, leaving the bone desert behind, but the image of the skull tower lingered in every mind. No one asked to land again. Back aboard Canner's Promise, the crew gathered around the logs. The scans confirmed the nightmare. The entire surface was bones, layered, stacked, piled, and some of it had been arranged. Towers, arches, formations that were not random. It was not only death. It was a message. The question none of them dared ask hung like a shadow in the air. Who built it? The ship was quiet after the landing. No one wanted to speak about what they had seen. The images were still replaying in their heads. The crunch of shattered skeletons beneath boots, the war machines half buried in rib cages, the tower of skulls staring outward with hollow sockets that felt too deliberate. The silence on the bridge was heavy, punctuated only by the steady hum of the ship's engines. Captain Dyer broke it first. "Seal the logs," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Classify everything. Full system record. Tag as hostile anomaly." The crew moved without answering. Fingers shook over consoles as they transferred the lander's recordings, the drone surveys, the ship scans. Hours of footage scrolled across the main display. Wrecked fleets, tumbling bones, dust storms of powder calcium. The sheer scale of it was almost meaningless. Shale, the sensor officer, did the cross-analysis. When he spoke, his voice cracked. "Captain, these aren't just from different species. They're from different epochs. Some of these remains are fresh, geologically speaking, hundreds of years at most. Others are fossilized so deep they must be millions. This isn't a single battle. This isn't even a single era." A hush fell again. Shale went on, unable to stop himself. "It's layered, generation upon generation, a continuous graveyard. It didn't all happen at once. It happened over forever." No one corrected him. The crew sat in silence as the implication sank in. Entire worlds, entire biospheres had been emptied here. Not just once, not in some forgotten ancient war, but again and again. Civilizations rose, thrived, died, and their bones ended here. A cycle written in calcium and dust. Cora whispered the thought aloud, though everyone had already thought it. This isn't a battlefield. It's a collection. Her words made several of them flinch. The final drone data painted an even darker picture. The bone signatures didn't stop at this system. Faint traces appeared across the neighboring stars. Clouds of debris, derelict wrecks, calcium dust stretching farther than their mission range. This wasn't one anomaly. This wasn't one planet. It was spreading. Ennis, still pale from her breakdown on the surface, stared at the data as if trying to will it away. How far does it go? Shale swallowed. His readings flickered on the screen, stars highlighted in red. Farther than our charts. Maybe across the entire sector. No one spoke for a long time. Dyer finally said what they all feared. If it stretches that far, then somewhere right now, it's still happening. The words settled over them like a shroud. They had come as explorers, expecting empty systems, dust, rock, maybe the faint spark of life. Instead, they had found evidence of an ongoing catastrophe. Not war, not natural disaster. Something stranger, bigger, and crueler. Whatever had stripped these worlds, it hadn't left ruins, technology, or artifacts. It had left only bones. And bones were not silence. Bones told stories. Even if no one wanted to listen, Alan, the youngest, finally broke down. His voice trembled, childlike. What if it comes for us? For Earth? No one answered him. Instead, they finished the logging process. The records were encrypted, bundled into a report that would take years to reach Central Command. By then, the crew knew it would be too late for questions. The bones would still be here. The bones would always be here. When the logs were sealed, Dyer gave the final order. Prepare for jump. The crew obeyed, grateful for the chance to leave. As Canner's Promise pulled away from orbit, the pale planet rolled beneath them one last time. Its surface glimmered with the red light of its dying sun. Seas of skulls catching the glow until the whole world looked aflame. The orbiting ring of bones turned slowly, endless, eternal. From this distance, it looked almost beautiful, like frost on a frozen lake, like the rings of Saturn mirrored in some alien nightmare. Only the details betrayed the truth. The sockets, the teeth, the jagged arcs of broken spines. The crew stared in silence. Some closed their eyes. Others couldn't look away. The jump drive began to hum. For a brief moment before translation, a flicker crossed the scanners. Shale frowned, leaning closer. Captain, I'm getting a reading. Movement. The word chilled the air. Everyone looked at the display. For an instant, one of the bone arcs shifted, a subtle rotation that didn't match orbital drift. Another fragment twitched, just slightly, as though it were settling or stirring. Then the signal vanished. Glitch, Dyer said firmly. His tone cut off any further questions. Prep for jump. The crew obeyed, hands moving automatically, but their eyes stayed locked on the fading image. The ship shuddered as the drive engaged. The stars stretched, bled into white, and the system fell away behind them. Yet in the silence that followed, every one of them carried the same thought, unspoken but heavy in their chests. The bones hadn't just shifted. They had turned to look.